Remember that feeling? Puberty hitting. Talk about awkward. And honestly, even having been there, I'm not sure we adults really get what it's like for young women today.
It's a whole different world.
Right. So we're diving into this book, Girl Power, The Way from Kid to Woman. It's written for young women in China going through puberty, but some stuff is universal, Just a heads up, it's direct. We're here to explore how it tackles things. Not saying we agree with everything.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they know it's direct. There's a whole section for parents basically saying, this might make you uncomfortable, but they did it on purpose.
Okay, so not just trying to be shocking. There's a reason they're so bold. Tell me more. I'm hooked already.
So their argument, it's about China's one-child policy and how that really changed family stuff this generation. Way fewer siblings. Parents are BUSY, that old school support system. Thinner.
Makes sense. Different world, like we said. And that's before even thinking about the internet, which adds a whole nother layer.
Exactly. Information overload. Right. And they're getting it whether it's accurate or not. The book's point is trying to shield them from awkward topics. Backfires. Big time.
Creates bigger problems down the line. Ignorance isn't bliss kind of thing.
Exactly. Unplanned pregnancies, mental health struggles, even, and this is scary, more vulnerable to exploitation because they're finding information somewhere, just not from the sources we'd want.
Wow. Okay, so way beyond the talk here. This is serious stuff.
Yeah.
So how does the book actually handle all this? Does it start with, the basic physical changes we all kind of know?
It does. Covers periods, breast development, that stuff. But I think what your deep dive is after is how it goes beyond that. The emotional side is huge.
Yeah, let's get into that. What kind of emotional changes are we talking?
So first off, it connects the emotional roller coaster directly to hormones, validates what these girls are going through. It's not moody, it's biology.
Giving them the science behind it. Which could be empowering, right? To understand what their body's doing.
Totally. Explains how hormones make you happy 1 minute, down the next. Confusing, frustrating, and not just for the teen, but everyone around them, which, let's be honest, we probably all relate to, even as adults.
Oh, absolutely. Still happens.
Oh.
What else about this emotional landscape?
One thing I found really insightful was how it talks about friendships changing. And not just because boys are suddenly interesting, it's how girls see each other that shifts too.
Because everyone's hitting puberty on their own timeline.
Right.
Creating these weird imbalances in those relationships.
Exactly. Some girls developing faster, insecurities pop up, jealousy. The whole dynamic's different, a lot to navigate.
And it's easy for us to forget how much that social stuff matters at that age. Speaking of which, does it talk about crushes? Like figuring out attraction?
It does, but in a way I thought was really good. It acknowledges those feelings, but stresses there's no right timeline. You feel ready for romance? Cool. Not there yet. Also cool. Both are normal.
Which is huge to hear with someone that told me that back then.
Right.
Okay, so we've got the physical changes, the emotions, friendships, shifting.
Yeah.
Does it give Eddie advice, like how to deal with all this?
It does, and this is where it gets really interesting. Some is what you'd expect, hygiene, talking to trusted adults, the basics, but then it goes into some unconventional stuff.
Okay, now you have to tell me. Unconventional how? Give me an example.
Well, it gets really detailed about internet safety, like surprisingly detailed, talking about spotting online scams, predators, even stuff like cam chats, which you don't see in every book for this age group.
Wow. Okay, so very much acknowledging the world they're living in online all the time.
Yeah.
But is it empowering or scary? That's a fine line to walk.
It is Oz, and that's worth discussing more. But before we do, another thing that jumped out at me, advice-wise, the book has a whole section on stealing.
Stealing? Huh. Wouldn't have thought of that for a puberty book, but
yeah.
I guess makes sense with the age group and all. Impulsivity is high.
Right. And what's fascinating is they don't just go stealing's bad, they break down the economics of it.
The economics of stealing. Okay, I've got to hear this. How do they even approach that?
They talk about the money side, not just the store loses something, but it impacts their rent, paying employees, the whole ripple effect.
Okay, so making it real world impact.
Yeah, they even say, like, if you steal a 100 RMB thing and the profit's only 10%, the owner needs to sell 10 more just to break even from your one theft.
That's concrete. Way more impactful than just saying it's wrong, especially to a teen brain.
And that's key, right? Their brains are still developing. Long-term thinking isn't always there. But money, fairness, that might hit different.
It's like that saying, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. This book gets that. All right, so internet safety, economics of stealing, both pretty heavy. What other unconventional advice did they have?
Well, from stealing, they go straight into another tough one, self-mutilation.
Whoa. Okay, they are not shying away from anything, are they?
Yeah.
That's such a hard topic anyway, let alone for this age group. How do you even begin to address that?
It's it's handled really directly, which I liked, actually. They start by, defining it, right? Self-mutilation, intentionally hurting yourself, like cutting, burning, and they frame it as like a way to cope when things get too intense,
Yeah.
emotions, experiences.
It makes sense, even though it's tough to hear. When you're that age, those big feelings hit you for the first time. You don't always have the right tools, to deal with it healthily. I can see how that goes wrong easily.
Totally. And they get that. The book's not saying it's good, obviously.
Yeah.
Just that happens. Self-harm, not the answer, not long-term. But then they give advice for, like, if it's you or if it's someone you know, how to handle it.
Okay, so what's their advice? I'm guessing communication's got to be a big part of it.
Huge. Talk to someone, they say. Parent, teacher, counselor, whoever. But someone trusted, who won't judge, just be there for you.
Having that safe space to open up is everything.
Right. And then, on top of that, finding healthy outlets for all that intensity. Art, music, writing, exercise, anything that lets you express it, but safely.
Right, so you're not bottling it up, but you're also not hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Finding those other coping mechanisms, that's got to be so key.
Totally. And sometimes just, like, getting it out, expressing it is a relief in itself.
For sure. It's not all on you to handle alone either. Do they talk about professional help?
Oh, yeah, they stress that too. If it's really bad or you just can't stop the urges, getting professional help is huge.
Hardest step sometimes, but so important. No shame in it. It's brave to ask for help when you need it.
Exactly. And that kind of ties into a bigger thing the book's getting at throughout, You're not alone in this.
Which is such a powerful message, really. We've covered internet safety, stealing, now self-harm. All heavy stuff. But I'm hoping there's also guidance on the good parts of growing up, right? We touched on life planning earlier. What's that like in the book?
It's surprisingly detailed. And it's not just what job you're going to have. It's deeper, like what kind of life you want to build, what brings you joy outside of work, all that.
Finding purpose, passion, stuff some adults I know are still working on. That's a lot to put on young shoulders.
I know, right? But they're talking about hobbies, interests, relationships, things that make for a good life. Overall, not just a successful one.
Easy to forget that when you're caught up in the day-to-day grind, honestly. Maybe we should all be reading this, not just teens. What else do they get into?
Experiences, travel, adventure, encouraging them to see the world, learn about other cultures, broaden their horizons, basically.
Love that. And it's not just like checking things off a list, right? It's about how that changes you. Growing as a person, understanding the world better, where you fit in.
Exactly. Circles back to that fulfillment thing. Beyond just a job, travel can spark new passions, you learn skills, meet all kinds of people.
It's about designing a life that feels like RCH, meaningful, whatever that means for you specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone from analyzing body language on cam chats to international travel warnings to now, like, the meaning of life, practically. Yeah. That's quite a range of advice this book covers.
It really is. But then again, adolescence, is that intense. Huge changes, challenges, but also tons of potential, Like, it can go anywhere from here.
This book seems to get that, both sides of it. The messy, the exciting.
Totally. Reminds us that even when it's awkward, uncertain, there's a lot of hope mixed in there, too.
And that is a good place to leave it, I think. For our listeners, what stood out to you? Did any of this hit home, bring back memories, good or bad? We dove into this book's very direct approach, and whether you agree with every piece of advice, it gets the conversation going right. And that's crucial, especially with young women in our lives. Thanks for joining us for this deep talk, everyone.
So it's, handled directly, kind of like we were saying, starts by defining it, right? Self-mutilation, hurting yourself on purpose, cutting, burning. They say it's like a way some people cope when stuff gets too overwhelming. Big emotions, tough experiences.
Yeah, it's rough to think about, but makes sense, right? When you're that age and those feelings hit you for the first time, it's not like you've got this whole toolbox of healthy ways to deal with it right off the bat.
Totally. And the book gets that. It's not saying it's good, obviously.
Right.
More like acknowledging it happens. They're clear that self-harm isn't the answer, not long-term. But what they do is give advice. Like, okay, if this is you or someone no NW, how to handle it.
Okay, so lay it on me. What's the advice? I'm guessing talking about it is a big part of it, right?
Huge. They struck that a lot. Talk to someone. Could be a parent, a teacher, counselor. Doesn't matter who exactly, as long as it's someone you trust, won't judge. Just be there to listen.
Just having that safe space to open up can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And on top of that, finding healthy ways to get those feelings OUT. Art, music, writing, even just exercising. If it lets you express that intensity safely, it's good.
So not keeping it bottled up, but also not hurting yourself. Finding those other coping mechanisms is huge, I bet.
It is. And sometimes, honestly, just getting it OUT there, expressing it, even if nothing changes right away, it's a relief in itself.
No doubt. But it's not all on you to handle alone either. Do they talk about getting, professional help?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They emphasize that. If it's really bad, those urges, or you just can't seem to stop, getting professional help is huge. No shame in that.
Can be the hardest step to take, but sometimes it's the most important. There's no shame in asking for help. In fact, sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do.
100%. And this kind of goes back to something bigger the book keeps saying throughout all this stuff,
Yeah.
You're not alone.
Which is such a powerful message. I feel like we need to hear that at any age, honestly, but especially then. We've covered internet safety. We talked about stealing, now self-harm, all pretty intense. But I'm really hoping there's also some guidance on, the good parts of growing up too. We touched on life planning earlier. What's that like in the book?
Surprisingly in depth, actually. It's not just about, what job are you going to have? It gets deeper than that. What kind of life do you want to build? What makes you happy, fulfilled, even outside of work? All that stuff.
Finding your purpose, your passion. I know people twice our age who are still working on that. That's a lot to ask young people to think about.
I know, right? But that's the thing, they're encouraging it. Hobbies, interests, relationships, stuff that makes for a good life overall, not just a successful one, whatever that even means.
It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget about all that, Honestly, this book, maybe everyone should read it, not just teens. What else is in there?
Experiences like travel, adventure, all that, encouraging these girls to get out there, see the world, learn about other cultures, broaden those horizons,
I love that. And it's not just checking places off a list, right? It's about how that changes you as a person. You understand the world better, your place in it.
Exactly. It all circles back to that fulfillment thing. Beyond just a job, travel can spark new passions in you. You learn new skills. You meet all kinds of people from different walks of life.
It's like you're not just existing. You're designing a life that feels, rid-ch, meaningful, however that looks for you specifically. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about physical changes, the emotional roller coaster, internet safety, even really difficult stuff like stealing and self-harm. And we end on this big picture idea of life planning, finding fulfillment. It's a journey, this book.
It really is. But then growing up, a journey, isn't it? All these huge changes, challenges. But that also means there's tons of potential. It can go anywhere from here.
This book seems to understand that. Both sides of it, the messy parts, A&D, the exciting parts. And honestly, that's what makes it so helpful, even if it's a little awkward sometimes.
I agree. Because even when it's awkward, uncomfortable, even when the advice is tough to hear, at least it's real. And that's what matters, right?
Exactly. So to everyone listening, what did you take away from all this? Did anything resonate with you, bring back memories, good or bad? We dove deep into this book's very direct approach to everything from internet safety to self-harm to even finding your purpose in life. And yeah, it might not have all the answers, but it gets the conversation started. And at the end of the day, isn't that what matters most? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.